Okay, so what I created here, and this is in your actual reference folder, is a collage.jpg. And you guys, whenever you're doing your own stuff, should make one of these. It's basically all the images you took on set or wherever you're, whatever reference you're using, and it's compiled into one large file. And this is a relatively large image file. You can go, it's about 5,000 by 5,000, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see here. Go to pixels. It's about 5,000 by 5,000 roughly. So what do we do here? As we're about to put in our base layer in this for these pieces. Now, you have to make a decision in here. What do you want to do with? You have to look at things from the macro level to the micro level. So what do I mean by that? You have to look past the dirt, the grime, the gunk, and find out what is your base layer, right? And then from there, we can get started. Now, I can go ahead and like zoom in here, and we can already see we've got all types of things in here that are added to the original. And whenever you build the base layer information, it's very pristine, it's very cleaned up. So you can almost imagine like this here, right? This being very cleaned up. And the first thing, one of the things I like to judge is the roughness. What is the roughness of this material here, right? So as you can see, there is indented division here. See that? It actually kind of bevels down and in. This is a height map information that we're going to be sort of building. You can see even like right here with this recycling bin, it's sort of kind of declines a little bit. It has a little bit of a valley in the area of white. Even right here, there's a little bit of, like recession, so to speak. And then you can see right here, like this right here is very rough. One of the things I didn't do, which I should have done, is on your phone, iPhone, or, whatever mobile device you have, you can shoot video. And I like to move around the object so that I can see the specularity of the material. You really can't judge specularity on the material unless you actually move around it and see if there's any reflections. Like I could be facing a shadowed area of this bottles, cans, paper, recycling only blue area and say, well, that looks very rough. In other words, not very reflective, right? But I bet if I were to rotate, you find it definitely has a slight metallic shininess to it. But you can obviously see from here to here that there is a certain level of roughness, but there is a certain level of metallicness to it as well. So again, roughness would be based on reflection. You can see here this has a very low roughness, and it has a very plasticky feel, right? So no metal for this, right? Because we're building everything based off of color, or I should say base color, roughness, and metallicness, okay? I'm not talking about height or normal map. That has to do with the bumpiness. So for instance, like this would be considered a height map issue where you have a scratch, right? So you have a scratch here, you have a scratch here, little tiny dinks, but very small little dents and so forth. So as you can see, like even these little rivets here, or I should say screws, are, they're different colored. This one's white, this one looks a little rustic. So we don't want to look at the micro level, which is the tiny details. We want to look at the macro level, which is the big details. So I can see first off that this is going to be a very rough grayscale, and I can actually sample this color with my JPEG off this side and get the actual physical color from my image here. So let's go ahead and just poke around. We do have to take some time on this. Now there becomes a decision where the materials inside of Substance Painter, there won't be anything that we can create in Substance Painter that will match up certain things in here unless we really go to town. One of those is definitely going to be this ground material. This ground material is very, very unique. I'll give you an example. Like, the question is, are we going for this material? And I would almost prefer this material, honestly. This is at a different location. The bike rack is actually at a different location. It's not at the same location. That's why the ground, you can see, looks different, but it has an interesting feel. So we're going to kind of like make our decisions. I like this. This sort of looks almost marble-esque. You can see it's got cracks. Those are the micro details, but I like the macro detail of it. So I might not necessarily choose this street here, although I'm kind of not sure yet. You can see there's just stains in here, But in general, if you were to kind of look at this street here and say, what is the macro details, it would be something like this, right? That's the macro details. And then added on top of that are cigarette butts, cracks, stains. You can see it's like kind of stained differently here and so forth. So it is what it is. So I think I might actually, I'm not 100% sure yet, because I might actually go for this piece right here yet. I'm not yet solved, but this material is something I'm going to create in Substance Designer. And we're only going to make one material in Substance Designer. Substance Designer is a whole nother class. In fact, we are developing a second class to deal with Substance Designer because it's just such an immense program. And that's where you create custom materials. So keep in mind that as we're going through this, we're creating custom materials. We're looking at the materials and we're going to try to recreate them. And again, I'm just moving around this thing, and you can see the specularity here. There's not a heavy roughness, but it's a slight roughness. You can see the reflections are even very diffuse, but the diffusion of the roughness may not be the roughness itself, but actually the actual way that the height map is developed. As the height map increases, that adds roughness. So your roughness value might be a value, for, of course, from 0 to 1, meaning probably a roughness of maybe like 0.7. Which gives you a very diffuse reflection. But at the same time, the roughness is basically bumpiness as well. So if you add height to this information, such as a granular kind of bumpiness, which this does have some kind of granular bumpiness, which is really giving this a diffused look, okay, then that's something to keep in mind. So the final look or blurred reflection is based on usually two things: your roughness level and your height information. And again, it has to do with the bumpiness that we're going to create. Let's go ahead and kind of poke around here. Some of these are too low resolution, so I got pretty close. This stuff in the middle looks like more metallic. Okay, it's less plastic than this. Very metallic, but you can see there's a general granular reality here. So we got to look for a grayscale map that's very bubbly and kind of messed up. I'm not looking at the tiny details like this scratch here, this scratch here. I'm really just looking at the small details on this. Now, this rotary has, again, a very, almost looks like leather-based texture to it, right? Like a leather surface, but it's plasticky. And then there's dirt and grime and all that, as you can see here, which we created in masks. But see how the difference between this and this? See how it has a very leathery, patchy sort of look to it? And this here, the handle is mostly just metal, but it looks kind of like worn. Let's go ahead and take a look at the... It's not exactly like chrome, right? It's somewhat metallic, but very, very diffused in the so-called roughness. Okay, it's almost like a very rough metal. Okay, so again, you got to kind of come in here and really work this out and kind of play around and say, okay, what's what here? And if I were to take a look again, this strip right here is different than this here. See that? So again, look at the different values. This is more metallic than this, right? We have these indents we're going to create. We're actually going to create this sort of reality. And what else we got here? Yeah, this looks different. I could be wrong about it. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. It's just, these feel different. This here looks a little bit different than this. I don't know. Maybe it's just because there's more dirt on it, which makes it more rough. But doesn't that feel like metal and that feels like plastic? This little black strip here. And then, of course, this is transparent. We're going to get into how we create transparent materials inside of Substance Painter, which is basically a plastic shell, as you can see. And there's a lot of gunk in here. This thing is really nasty and so forth. And you can almost say there's a thickness to it where it gets really weird and thick here, right? So there's a lot we can play with. And then we got this dirt here. So what is the biggest base on this that we can kind of like establish, right? Let's go ahead and take a look. Well, if I were to look at it from a generalistic standpoint, I would probably go with one of two materials. This kind of light gray material, and then right over here is this kind of dark gray material, right? And then we have the rotary, which is a little bit darker, you can see here. But I think the first layer we can throw on is probably this here, as you can see, this kind of grayscale. And then we're going to add on top of it these new materials that we're going to create. So let's go ahead and jump into Substance Painter and get started on our actual garbage bin.